which should give you some encouragement that if he chose him, then hey, I get a chance too. But Jacob, his whole thing, when he was born, it starts off awkward, okay? He's a twin. And the first thing, Esau, his brother's coming out, and then what's he do? He reaches out and grabs his heel. I'm like, that had to have been weird, I mean, I've seen all three of my kids born, and it would have been really odd to see a hand shoot out and grab it, I mean, just super awkward. Just tell it like it is, but tell me that's not awkward, especially you women who've had babies. I mean, that would just, I don't know what you would do on that one. But so anyway, grabs the heel, So at that point, they're like, well, this is what we're going to call him. We're going to call him the heel grabber, Jacob. And Jacob was this interesting character because he grew up, he was kind of a mama's boy. Any mama's boys in here? I'm a mama's boy. Any other mama's boy? Yeah, just be honest. I know, Nathan. Nathan, are you a mama's boy? Amen, Nathan. Way to be, you didn't raise your hand. You had to get busted out by somebody behind you, but it's a special breed to be a mama's boy. I know it has a bad connotation. You're mama's boy, but it's a good thing, okay? But this is who Jacob was. He was a mama's boy. He stayed back in the tents, hung out with mom, while Esau was out there being a man's man. He was a hairy guy. He liked to go out and hunt. And then we have this really strange story where one day Esau comes in. He's been out hunting and everything, and he's famished, and he goes up to his brother. And this is when we start to see a little bit of Jacob's character. And I think, as I've read, maybe this is also the mom's character a little bit because he had to learn it from somewhere. But he gets this situation happens. Esau comes in and he's like, I'm so hungry. Give me some of that soup you're making or stew or whatever it is. I never could figure out what it was exactly. It does not sound good to me. Lentils, I'm like, it's like ramen, or whatever. I mean, ramen's good though. But anyway, so give me some of your ramen, dude. And he's like, okay, I will, but you need to give me your birthright. Now, understanding this birthright thing, this is a huge deal in this culture, okay? Esau's the firstborn, so he's really tasked with, as the firstborn, being the one to carry on the legacy of the family and take care of dad's stuff when he passes and kind of be the next head of the family. And he just comes in and says, for some soup, some ramen noodles, 29 cents, even with inflation, give me those, and I'm going to give you my birthright. And Jacob's like, that's a good, yeah, I'll take it. Just bizarre story, right? And we'll circle back around to Esau in a little bit because it's important. But so at this moment, I'm not sure exactly what happened here. Some of you guys that are smarter can probably tell me, but I guess it just didn't get quite communicated to dad or whatever. It's like, now we gotta get this blessing from dad, right? So he goes, and dad is old. Dad can't see. He's like me without my glasses. Don't try any, no, I just gave people an idea now. They're gonna try to sneak something over on me probably, but he puts all this weird hair on him. And he walks up to dad. He's like, hey, I'm Esau, And he's like, okay, cool. And he grabs him and he puts this final blessing, which is a big deal too. It's something that he would probably been planning for years and years. This final blessing I'm going to give my boys. And the one that was supposed to be for Esau went to Jacob. So not only did he kind of play his brother, but then he played his dad. And now Jacob goes out. And he has this situation where he goes and he sees this woman. And this woman's name is Rachel. She's lovely and form and beautiful, it says. I can relate to this story of a Rachel being lovely and form and beautiful. I married one. She is awesome. I wish she was here so you could see how lovely and beautiful she is. But so he goes and he sees her and he's like, I've got to have her as a wife. And this guy Laban he's working for says, hey, I'll give you her, but you got to work for me for 7 years. I think Jacob met his match in Laban. If you kind of read about Laban a little bit, Laban wasn't a real good guy either. I think he kind of met his match, and Laban's like, okay, yeah, work for me for 7 years. That's a long time. But he goes out, works for him for 7 years, and he's like, all right, I'm going to get my wife Rachel. And he goes, no, you got to marry this chick Leah, which meant weak eyes. Here's what's funny about weak eyes. Didn't mean she couldn't see well. It meant she was ugly. The Hebrews were that was a nice way of saying this girl's ugly. I feel bad for her, but she was not fun to look at. They're like her. It makes your eyes hurt when you look at her. Okay? So, yeah, I know. Emotional damage, But, so so he gets her instead, and Laban's like, well, this is my oldest daughter, so you got to take her, kind of does this flip on him. Now you got to work another 7 years so you can get who you really want. It's like, dang it, okay. So he does that. Then he gets Rachel, so now he's got these 2 wives, and he's starting to amass this property and everything because he worked for Laban for a while. Then he kind of goes out on his own. And this is where we start to lead up to the story. And what you see in these different stories is you see this dynamic in Jacob's character that's really he's just not a real great guy. Even when him and Laban started to separate, they would have this meal that was kind of a reconciliation meal. And those 2 guys were so prideful and rubbed each other the wrong way. They actually had 2 different meals because they couldn't decide which one they were going to go with. So it's like, well, I want to do it my way. No, I want to do it my way. And so there's just this character in Jacob that you're like, what is with this dude? And then we see that this guy's just full of fear because he's going to meet Esau for the first time in a long time. And you can read it there in Genesis 32 before what we read. And there's this whole story of him setting up this situation where he splits his wives and property and servants and all that into 2 different teams, basically. And of course, who does he send to the wolf's den first? Let's send old Weak Eyes first. I'm going to keep the good one back here. I'm like, that girl just gets nothing. Man, she's just messed over. But send old Weak Eyes and their family first. And then I'm going to send these servants up ahead. And they're going to give these gifts to him. And I hope Esau won't just whack me because he's so mad at me because he hadn't seen me in so long. And I messed him over last time we saw each other. And so he's got all this fear. This shows you what you need to know about Jacob, just this. He's in the back of the line with all this. He's not up in front. He's in the back of everybody going, you all go before me, give him these gifts. Hopefully when he finally sees me, he'll be good to go. So we got this dude, Jacob, is just kind of a wreck. And he goes into this situation where they're going to cross this fjord, whatever you want to call it. They go across, and he's standing there, and this man comes up, and they wrestle. And it's an interesting story because this guy is so characterless to this point, but we see a different side of him. We see a guy who really goes to battle. A guy who really has now we're starting to see something good here. We see a guy who's willing to persevere. And I see 2 big things in all of this, and it'll make sense why I shared all that extra here in a second. But there's 2 big things that I wanted to highlight in kind of this section of Jacob's life. The first point is struggling with God is necessary and expected. That it's necessary and expected. There's an obvious parallel in all this with Jacob wrestling this man in this concept of how we need to wrestle with God. Despite the challenges that may be there, despite the different things that go on in our lives, there is this mindset that we've got to get in with God that's different than I think of what we have. I think sometimes with God we take one of two approaches. One of those approaches is, well, God's God, He's going to do what He does, and if He does something I don't like, I'm just going to pout. Right? Any of you relate to that? I do. I've related to that. Well, God's God, He can do what He wants, and I don't like this, but whatever. And I kind of get a little bitter. And kind of sit over there and pout a little bit. Or you can have the other one where you lash out at God, and you get frustrated with Him, and you're like, why are you doing this to me? And sometimes we think that second one is the bad one, and the first one's the good one, when it's the reverse. Because what you really see in God is you see a God who honors someone who struggles with Him. When you get in there and really wrestle with God, if you don't believe me, just read the Psalms with that lens. Because you see it with David and the psalmist all the time. God, why are you doing this to me? What's happening? Why are you leaving me? Why are you whatever? And you see that wrestle. And that's what Jacob's showing us here, is that not only is it necessary, but it's expected. How do we know it's expected? Because of the name that he's given. The name he's given is Israel. And I want you to understand two really cool things with this. Number one is he gave him this name as a person. And that's really cool, because he said, you're going to struggle with God and with humans, and you're going to overcome. Not only are you going to struggle with me and with people, but you're going to overcome. So he gave him this really cool name. But why would he give him that name when he could have given him any other name? It's because he was laying out a path that who he then became, right? He was the head of the people Israel. It wasn't just naming him, but he was also naming his people, who we are a lineage from, in a spiritual sense, right? And so what did he say? You are to be those who struggle with God and with man and overcome. The expectation is that you are going to struggle. I think for years, I know my generation of Christians at least, we used to say struggling was bad. Oh, they're weak and struggling. But I would counter now, from what I've learned over these years, with this. That's a good thing. Because it's that struggle where you actually grow in your faith. It's that struggle with God where you actually grow in your character. How often do you grow when things are going well? Sometimes. It's not like it has to be bad for you to grow. Sometimes we grow when things are good. But when you really, those defining moments in your life as a Christian, I'm coming up on 30 years. December 30th will be 30 years for me of being a Christian. I can look back over those 30 years and go, man, there's some defining moments. And there were some times where it was just good relationship with God, fun, encouraging things, like moving to Columbia. That was a thing that changed a lot in my character, and that was an encouraging thing. But the things that really moved my heart and really matured me were challenges. It was those things that happened that were just, man, that's tough. You know, Janice had mentioned that Rachel and I led the church in Oklahoma City, and those guys that know me for a long time, Chris, Greg, all them, since I was 20, so we moved there when I was 40 years old to Oklahoma City. When I was 20s when I became a Christian. 6 months after I became a Christian, I got up on the stage of where we were meeting in Wichita and the church, and it was vacant. Everybody had left. And I got up and I preached a sermon to the empty seats. And that day, I really believe God was giving me a vision of what I wanted to do with my life as a Christian. It took 20 years from that point to actually get to that dream. 20 years. It wasn't even 7 and 7 that Jacob did, but it was another 6, right? It was a long time. There were times when I gave up. There were times when people said, why are you even dreaming that? And I didn't even know. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm stupid. What is the point? I'm getting to be 40 here. But God made it happen. But I want you to picture dreaming for something for 20 years, doing it only for 5, and then getting fired or let go for someone who was younger and better, in someone else's opinion. I want you to picture that. I'm not saying that for sympathy at all, but I want you to think about what that produces in someone. What that would produce in you. And I bet many of you have had disappointments like that in your life. What do you do when that happens? What do you do with it? Do you pout? Do you get depressed and discouraged? Or do you go and contend with God? Because that's what He's looking for. He wants you to come and contend with Him. Let's wrestle. And I tell you what we learn from this story is God don't fight fair. Does He? What'd He do? I was like, that was dirty. He did him dirty. Boonk. You know? What was weird is Jacob is thought to be about 97 years old. And I'm like, and he had 2 good hips? How'd he manage that? I'm about to turn 50 and I'm like a wreck. Dude was 97 with 2 good hips. I guess because they walked everywhere or something. But anyway, he just whacked him on the hip. It's like, man, this ain't going well. Boonk. I'm like, dang, that's dirty. But God does it that way too. And He doesn't do it because He's dirty. He does it because sometimes He wants to just see how far you're going to go. How hard are you going to wrestle? It isn't just enough, church, and I'm going to emphasize this again later, it's not just enough to persevere. Some of us, and I'm talking to you older Christians, some of us are just wanting to ride this out till the end. I put in my time, I did my thing, was on a church planning, got married, had kids, graduated from college, did all the stuff I was supposed to do. Now I just kind of want to rest. And we don't see anything in here that's inspiring of people who just rode to the end. We see guys like Caleb who got up and said, give me this dadgum hill country, right? Just an old dude who's like, give me this. I deserve, that kind of moxie, man. That's what God looks for. And that's my second thing that I saw out of this, is that there's a tenacious perseverance that we need to have as disciples. And I use those words carefully and precisely, tenacious perseverance. Because there's a tenacity that we've got to have as disciples. Where you've got what the Hebrew word is chutzpah. You've got some grit. And I tell you what you see from this story is God honors that. And it's not just this story. There's many others where God honors that. And you don't have to be a type A personality to have chutzpah. You just need to be someone who contends with God, who gets in there and fights, who gets in there and battles and says, you know what, I don't like this, but God, we're going to fight until I either get the blessing or I get the understanding. Where do we see that laid out for us in the best possible way? Jesus in the garden. What did Jesus do? He went and contended with God. I don't want to die, God. I kind of like this life. I mean, it's tough. People don't like me much. But boy, I like being here. I like the relationships I have. I like being human. I don't want to die. But you know what, God? Not my will, but yours be done. And he contended, because it wasn't just once, and it wasn't twice. It was 3 times. If Jesus had to contend with God 3 times, how many times are you going to have to contend with God? Mine's getting up in the hundreds, I'm guessing. Because I ain't anywhere close to that guy. I'm going to have to go to battle for my heart, for blessings, for whatever it is. Because I want you to have, here's an equation I want to give you, and this is time tested. But it's time over tension equals growth. So over time, if you allow there to be that tension, you're going to grow. We so often, I think we just need to adjust a little bit our relationship with God. I'm not saying God's up here just hammering on you. There's times where God just gives you blessing for no reason, and it's awesome. There's times where God gives us blessings knowing that those blessings are going to could potentially drag us away. Think about it. There's stuff God's given me, I'm like, this is awesome, and then I abuse it in some sort of way. And then I'm like, well, that was dumb. And God knew I was going to be dumb, but he gave it to me anyway because he likes to give. He likes me to be happy. I mean, think about Jesus turning the water to wine. What the heck was that? Didn't he know those guys were going to get drunk? Yeah. Jesus isn't stupid. But why did he give it? You ever think about that? Because he loves to give. But ultimately, guys, it comes down to this tenacious perseverance. I think God would rather take the one who will fight than the one who is apathetic. Guys, I want to share with you, this is, if you don't get anything else out of today, I want you to get this. Apathy is poison for the church of God. It is poison. I can't say it strong enough that apathy will take you out. That's what Satan wants more than anything. He knows that you guys that have been around a while especially, he knows you're not going anywhere. You've already proven that. You went through enough struggles, enough things. It's like you're not, this dude, this gal, they're not going anywhere. But guess what? If I can get them to be apathetic and not care and just kind of ride the wave, well, that's just as good. Actually, that's even worse. It's good for the devil that you're apathetic. Because guess what? If you're apathetic, guess who else is going to be tend to be apathetic? Those who watch you. Your kids, the people in your small groups. Apathy spreads. And if they don't see you on fire, or you excited, or you, not like you got to be bouncing around all the time, but if they don't see in you this steady, tenacious perseverance that's moving the ball forward all the time, it gets different in life, right? Getting ready to turn 50, I'm slowing down. There's not as many things that I can do, but I can always move the ball forward somehow. I can call somebody. We have technology that blows my mind. Now, when we moved here in 97, we didn't have these. We didn't have Zoom. We didn't have all these different things where even if we're just at home propping our feet up, we can talk to one another in a real and meaningful way. Nevertheless, just having someone into your home, right? But we have all these opportunities. And what are we doing? Are we moving the ball forward? I want to share a quick story in Acts 14. You can just write this down. Acts 14, 19 through 20, because it shows you a little bit of what I'm talking about with this tenacious perseverance. Acts 14, 19 through 20, it said, "Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. Does anything strike you about that story? My gosh, talk about burying the lead in the scriptures. This is at the end of a chapter. It's very subtle. But think about what just happened. Paul got stoned to death. That means they threw rocks at him. He wasn't smoking marijuana. They were throwing stones at him. Jeremy, I need to help you with that. Throwing rocks at him. Some of you didn't get that. That's okay. That's actually really good you didn't get that. But they're throwing rocks at him until they think he's dead. Can you imagine? I've been hit with a rock one time in my life in the head. It hurts. Getting hit with so many of them they think you're dead is a different level. Then they drag him outside the city. They're thinking this dude's dead good. And what's his response to that? Let me go back in. And here's the crazy thing. The next day he leaves. So did he have to go back into that town for any reason? Other than, I'm leaving on my terms, not yours. You want to talk about some tenacity. I mean, that's like, he's either crazy or he's just a baller. Right? But that illustrates perfectly what I'm talking about as Christians. We get knocked down for way less, and we lay there for way longer. And it's not like sometimes, don't get me wrong, I'm not speaking in like every time, every situation. I get it. I've had some wounds. Chris and I and Greg were talking about some of the things that have happened recently. Sometimes it's hard, but ultimately the heart that I want you to get is you got to get back up and get back into the town and say, devil, I'm not letting you win. I'm going to leave on my terms, which is usually the same as God's terms in these situations, because he wants you to get up and get back in there. Some of us, when we go out on the evangelism field, we talk to one person, they say no, and they're like, everybody's open, nobody's open, everybody's closed. Or you walk up to somebody and you have a conversation with them, and they're closed. We just give up so quick on even little things like that. And then think about the bigger things where we just fold. But there's a level of tenaciousness here that God wants us to see from Jacob, that he wants us to see from these stories, that we've got to get to. I want to ask you what fuels your tenacity this morning. One of the things is, of course, it's putting on the full armor of God. I want to give you a little acronym here that I think will help you. It's VIC, VIC, V-I-C. Variety, intensity, consistency. I've been using this to help me with my relationship with God, because those of you that have been around for a while, and maybe some of those of you that are younger as well, we look at our relationship with God as two things, typically. Reading my Bible and praying, right? And those are good. Those are your bread and your butter. But there's so much more to it than that. And if we don't learn to have the variety in our relationship with God, where we get out in nature, where we do things that connect us with God, whether it's nature, I love going to baseball games. And people laughed at me when I've shared this before, but it's true. When I go to a baseball game by myself and watch it, I feel a connection with God, because I'm enjoying a blessing, and I feel like God just knows it. And when I'm there, I'm always cognizant of God in those moments. And so I try to do that as much as I can. And everybody will be like, yeah, you just want to go to ball games and justify it. Well, maybe. No, but I'm just kidding. I really do feel connected with God in those moments. It makes me feel connected with God to come and share a message with you guys. Sometimes I just write them even though I don't ever know when I'm going to preach it, because it just feels like me and God working together to do a project. Me and Dad. What are some things that you can do to bring some variety to your relationship with God? Explore those things. Don't just get stuck in reading the Bible and praying. Those are good things. Again, I'm not saying they're bad, but don't just get stuck in that as your relationship with God. The other one's intensity, focus. It's really when you're with God, be in the moment. Guys, I can't tell you how we all miss this so much. How many times have you gotten some time in the Bible and prayed, and then by the end of the day, you couldn't remember what you read, you don't remember what you prayed, but you just did it because you were doing it? And those of you that have been around a while, you get what I'm coming, where I'm coming from. What if we had an intensity about it? Not like, but we were just in the moment with God, where we just listened to God, where we were just make sure, let me be present. Even if it's just for a few minutes, let me be present with God. The society we live in is going so fast. What if I just sit for a minute with God and I'm in the moment? How would it change things? And then the C is consistency. Just being consistent in your relationship with God. I'm here to tell you, you can make it to heaven without having a quiet time every single day. It can happen. But how is it different if you have this variety and intensity and you're consistent with it? How does it change things? You don't have to just sit down and read 10 chapters out of the Bible to get close to God. What if you just went out and prayed and read one verse and you just sat there for a while and you were consistent in doing that? What if every day you just prayed a prayer of gratitude? Just say, you know what, for the next 14 days, I'm just going to pray a gratitude prayer every day, and I'm going to write down what I'm grateful for. What if you just did things like that, but you were just consistent? Where we get bit as older Christians, I guarantee you, if we had a confession time right now, one of the biggest things people would say is, I'm just not consistent enough in my relationship with God. We would say it. I guarantee you. Some of you would come up and shine like a star because it's like you are. But a lot of us, if we're just honest, it's hard to be consistent. But what if you just focused on that? What if you focused on variety, intensity, consistency? Don't you think that would grow your perseverance, your tenacity? Because you're connecting with God and you're contending with God. That relationship is contentious sometimes. What if you're in there fighting for it consistently? Guys, I want to read you a quote as I wrap up here, okay? And this is from probably one of the greatest theologians / orators / fictional boxing characters that you've ever seen. His name is Rocky Balboa. Such a man of the people. But he said in one of his movies, I don't know which one, there's been so many, the world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place. And I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you get hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. Guys, I want to encourage you with a tenacious perseverance, but to understand that the struggle is real, that it's going to happen, and that it's expected and it's necessary. And don't be afraid to go contend with God. If you're in a rough spot right now, just tell him how you feel, because guess what? He already knows. But he wants you to connect with him. It's better for you to go yell at God and tell him how you really feel than it is to sit in the corner and mope. God wants you to have that chutzpah. He wants you to have that tenacity. Whether you're a type A, a type B, or somewhere in between, developing that in your character is going to be something that you look back on someday and go, man, I'm glad I have it, because times ain't going to get easier for you, Christian. It's only going to get harder as we go. But if you contend with God and you allow Him to build that within you, when it's all said and done, you know what they'll say about you? They'll say, you brought glory to the Almighty. Amen? Amen. God bless the church.
Wow.